Parents, let me know if this is true about your child. They probably don't just have one speed. On one moment, they're bouncing off the walls, they're shouting, they're spinning, they're jumping off the furniture, but then they're also melting down when something doesn't go their way. And then the next moment, they're completely zoned out. They're disconnected. There's a blank stare. You can't really tell if they're listening to you or if they're even in the room with you at all. You've probably tried parenting books, you've done behavioral interventions, maybe reward charts, maybe even medications, right? I know that is a step that many of the families that we work with have turned to, but you're still stuck and you're still left asking, why is this going on? Why does my child struggle with regulation, with focus, with attention? So the most important question to be asking isn't not just the why, but it's the how do I help them? What are the action steps that I can do to get them at a better place? And to be honest, preferably without the medications, right? Because there are so many side effects that go along with those. So the important truth that no one is really talking about is that these labels that we use of ADHD or what used to be called ADD, they're often just the tip of the iceberg. There's more to the story there. Underneath those, there's different neurological patterns and presentations, things that we refer to as the raging bull versus the drunken bull. And we want to make sense of both the symptoms of what's going on in everyday life, the challenges that come from them as a parent, but also want to make sense of where is it coming from a neurological perspective. Because if we get to that cause piece of it, if we understand why a struggle is taking place, it really does lead directly to the action steps of how to unlock that. Those terminology that I just threw around, the raging bull, that tends to be more the hyperactive, the ADHD, stuck on, flooded with energy, impulsive, big emotions that can't be controlled. Whereas the drunken bull, that's more the ADD type, sometimes shut down and exhausted. Sometimes they're just a little bit slow to process. There's almost like this discoordination neurological process that's going on, and they're overwhelmed easily by the world around them. Regardless of where your child falls into the spectrum of the raging bull versus drunken bull, or the very common combination of both of those, what I want you to understand here and what I want them to understand is that your child is not broken. They don't need another label. They don't need another diagnosis to describe them. What they really need is answers. And what we really need is a way to get them out of that, and a way to take these labels and these diagnoses and make them a superpower. Because that's what they are, right? That busy, high energy brain is absolutely something that when it is appropriately reined in and given the guardrails, it can be, and it is a superpower that any high achiever, productive person in the world has a little bit of that crazy busy brain too. So let's dig into it a little bit. When we understand the real root neurological challenges here, we realize the deficits that medications have, right? So many of these medications, maybe they do make a little bit of a difference with the symptomatology, but they come with some heavy side effects, right? The top 10 side effects of ADHD medications is not a fun list, right? It's stuff like sleep problems, low appetite, emotional irritability, motor tics, headaches, stomach pain, blood pressure and heart rate often are rising. There's societal withdrawal. But the biggest thing is they're just not fixing the why, right? ADHD is not caused by a deficiency of Ritalin or Strattera or Concerta or anything else. Hopefully, if you're on those and your kid is taking them, they are making a difference. Hopefully it is making everyday life a little bit more manageable. But I've never met a parent who wouldn't rather accomplish that without it. So let's understand that. What is really going on here, whether it's the ADD, the ADHD terminologies, and what you might not realize is that ADD phrase isn't really used anymore, right? Right now, ADHD is the only DSM diagnosis, and that ADD terminology really gets bucketed underneath that, because the ADHD presentation has 3 different types if we're diagnosing these. There's the hyperactive version of that. There's more of the inattentive version, or the combo that a lot of people lump into. But what we see is that hyperactive is more of the ADHD raging bull presentation, whereas the inattentive is more of the ADD, historically drunken bull pattern. But ultimately, regardless of which one your kid skews to, a lot of the symptoms overlap and tend to create problems with both of them, right? The one that's maybe having a hard time focusing tends to get a little bit more emotional and dysregulated in that sense, because it is just a frustrating experience to not be able to keep up with stuff in class, or to really feel like they're in tune with what's going on. So The common thread in all of those is a dysregulated, dysfunctional nervous system. Let me explain what that means. It specifically shows up as a sympathetic dominant nervous system. What you'll hear us refer to that as is the gas pedal. The gas pedal in your nervous system is that fight or flight response. If we're getting technical with the scientific terms, the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches of the autonomic nervous system are what we're referring to here. A little simplistic analogy as a parent is just to think of it as the gas and the brakes. The gas pedal is totally appropriate if you're running from a bear in the woods. If you're in some sort of temporary survival mode situation, you need that fight or flight mode turned on, right? You want that high energy survival instinct. But that's not reality, right? You're hopefully not running from a bear all the time. The brake pedal, that is our calming, rest, relaxation, digestion, immune system function, all of the stuff that we need for wellness is that parasympathetic tone. So the gas versus brake balance here is the underlying factor in so many chronic neurologically challenged kids, right? It is the imbalance that leads to so many other things. What we see and what a lot of parents and providers don't realize is that there's tension and misalignment within the neurospinal system creates a massive brain and body disconnection. Your brain and body aren't able to communicate as well anymore, and that creates a stress response, right? The fancy word for that is disafferentation. It's a bombardment of stress from a sensory perspective into the nervous system. So your brain goes from a mellow, calm, chill state to fight or flight. It goes into gas pedal survival instinct. When that happens, specifically when we get stuck in that mode, there's a whole series of downstream consequences that shows up like a raging bull, like a drunken bull, like inability to regulate emotions and everything else. And that makes sense, right? If your kid's RPM ticker, if their baseline is up here, say it's a 7, 8, 9 out of 10, at rest, when they're just chilling in a calm environment, well, of course, if you demand more of them, if there's something that doesn't go their way, if there's a busy classroom environment, it's going to be way harder to focus. It's going to be harder to calibrate and regulate those emotions, and they're so much easier to fly off the handle. It's not that they're going from 0 to 100 in an instant. They're going from 90 to 100, right? They're already ramped up and primed. So what we need to do is address that baseline resting level of stress within their nervous system so that when life happens, because life is going to happen, there's going to be stressors, it doesn't push them over the edge. We don't reach that breaking point as easily. Another way you could look at this, and so many kids resonate with this, especially in that kind of elementary, middle school age range, their brain is like a Lamborghini engine and a bicycle pedal brakes, right? They've got that superpower, horsepower that is moving a million miles an hour without any ability to calibrate it. The problem is the traditional model isn't to raise the brakes, to use that superpower. It's let's give them the bicycle pedal engine to match up with the bicycle pedal brakes. That, I think, is doing a disservice to kids with that superpower of that busy brain. Let's take that strength and match it with the supercharged brake pedal. There's so much more that we could get into as far as, well, why does that happen? Where is that coming from, right? The brake pedal, that calming side of your nervous system, is primarily from a nerve called the vagus nerve. It runs from the base of your skull right by these first couple cervical vertebrae, which is why upper neck stress is even more impactful for kids, because it not only is ramping up that stress response, but it's turning off the brakes. That's also why the birth process is such a missing piece of this, and so many of the kids that we see struggling with chronic neurological challenges have some sort of birth trauma, birth intervention, pregnancy stress. They've probably been there since day one, and that neurological cascade has just gotten locked in and never gotten undone. And that's why so many of the babies are colicky, refluxy, nursing problems. They had ear infections, they had immune struggles earlier on. Then the sensory challenges develop. Maybe there's motor and speech delays. And throughout the lifespan, providers are looking at those as completely separate, isolated things, whereas we see it as all part of the same journey, all part of that perfect storm process that has kids locked in stress. So regardless of where we're at, regardless of if we have that raging bull or that drunken bull tendency, this is what we need to get to. We need to unlock that ability to heal that kids have, right? Like we said earlier, they're not broken. They don't need another label. They just need answers. And we need to maximize that what's looked at as a deficit right now and turn it into a superpower. That is where scans are really, really helpful, right? We have 3 different neurological tests that we can do at Thrive. One of these here, this big picture view first, that is measuring this gas versus brake response. It's measuring how well is your nervous system fighting against stress. Are we in a balanced state, or are we skewed more into that fight or flight mode? Those other two scans are let us look into where within the nervous system are those main findings, right? Do we have that upper cervical pattern that has us locked into survival mode? Do we have more of adrenals, gas pedal, cortisol, adrenaline pumping all the time? That lets us put together a game plan to get the kid out of that survival mode back into a well-adapted and regulated state. So parents, that's my summary for you here, is that there are so many kids struggling with this, and I know so many parents who don't want their kids to be on medications, don't want that list of side effects that we just rattled off. They're looking to get to the why, they just don't know there's any options. There are. We gotta address the cause so that we can get rid of the symptoms as well. I hope that helps. Please share this with somebody that you know has a kid struggling with these sort of challenges. Share it with a provider who is looking for ways to help kids in a more holistic way, because we're all on the same team. We're all working together to make sure your kid is thriving.